Frank, and thanks for this putting all this great session together. So I thought I would talk about something which was actually in the program this exact day last December in the first year in maths meeting then, but maybe a sort of broader perspective on it than that. We've had a bit more experience. So okay, so what I'm going to talk about is the way there was quite a lot of tutorials online at UNSW in maths in which there were two tutors. Not just tutorials, we even had some lectures like that too. And this actually started before the pandemic, which was quite sort of lucky really, because we had a little bit of experience. In 2009, we actually ran a sort of virtual, we called it a virtual tutorial, because we already had things called online tutorials. As someone already mentioned today, that what we meant by that was sort of self-paced lessons online. So we already had, so we had these virtual tutorials in 2019 for the course called Discrete Mathematics, first year course. And the reason for that was actually, it was partly to experiment, just to see, we thought we would probably need to get some experience with this kind of thing. And also for equity reasons, there are students who have to travel a long way for a tutorial, and it seemed like a good idea perhaps to cut down on the travel time if it wasn't completely replacing their university experience, and they were choosing to do it. So it was quite a different thing to the pandemic. So we did that we have 3 terms at UNSW, as many people know, and we did that for terms 1, 2, and 3. And we also started doing that in term 1 of 2020, we sort of expanded it a little bit to Maths 1A course. And the students had to apply to be part of this. They couldn't just choose this without saying they had a reason. They had to have a reason, like they lived a long way from the campus, or they had some childcare reasons, or perhaps there was actually one student who well, I didn't find this out until afterwards, but the reason they wanted to do it was because they had hearing difficulties, and actually joining on a computer was quite beneficial for them in terms of their hearing aid and that kind of thing. So they had to sign up and they had to want to do it. So it was quite different. We did this on Blackboard Collaborate, which was a system, well, it's a bit like Zoom, probably not as nice as Zoom on Teams, but it's sort of integrated with Moodle, so that was nice and convenient. And we had 2 tutors in the room, and the reason we did that initially was it was new. We thought it would be a good way to sort of build in a bit of redundancy. The tutors weren't used to the system. It would just make it a bit easier. And we sort of doubled the tutorial capacity. Well, initially we only had the same, we just tried it. Then we discovered that only half of the students were turning up. So we may as well double the capacity. And it was about the same number of students in the room, virtual room, as in the physical rooms. But having 2 tutors, apart from helping if they had some internet problems, there's a lot of cognitive load involved in the new environment. It gets easier as you go, but initially, dealing with the chat and all the technology, it's just easier if you have two people there. And of course, you've probably all seen that the chat can be quite active in a tutorial with this online systems. Students who wouldn't normally speak up in class will put things in the chat and that kind of thing. We also sort of hope that it might be a more lively, inviting sort of format. I'm sort of thinking of the breakfast radio duos, all this, and there's a lot of examples of sort of entertainment formats where 2 people, two is more than the sum of 2 single presenters. So it was just something new to try, and perhaps it might help to enliven the class online, especially as we weren't really sure how it would work. Anyway, so we did this before the pandemic. This slide is just a screenshot from Nathan Jackson and Amanda Michelle's talk this time last year. You can see the names at the bottom, and the date, in fact. So my student evaluations is actually Nathan's student evaluations. And you can see that there were some very positive comments about this. Tutes were fun and well explained. There's a perfect balance between fun and learning, which made it enjoyable to attend both tutorials each week. This course had 2 tutorials per week. And you might even recognize some names here. The Daniel is Daniel Mansfield, and the Sean is Sean Gardner. Some of you will know these people. And I'm not sure whether Law, who's talking tomorrow, was involved in 2019, but certainly was later in 2020, was involved in these tutorials. Okay, so that seemed to work pretty well. This was an idea, this sort of co-teaching idea was something I wanted to try for a while. And in fact, in 2020 term 1, before, just when people started to hear about the pandemic as this distant thing and not really worry too much about it, we had a small sort of pot of money to try to do some digital uplift for Math 1131, that's the Math 1A course. And we were going to use that to film some lectures and then edit those into something good. Of course, this was completely ruined by the pandemic. But Law, who's in this picture, who will be speaking tomorrow, and I decided to present one of the streams of Math 1131, the algebra half, as a sort of double act in the lecture theatre. So this wasn't online at all, but it's the idea of co-teaching was I guess it wasn't just something which we did in the pandemic. It was something we were trying before. I wanted to know perhaps would this improve lecture attendance? If just a different format, students could choose to come to lectures or not. Really, they weren't. Everyone knows that lecture attendance was dropping. Just something new to try. But perhaps even more importantly, we wanted to model the way mathematics feels to us. We often talk about mathematics. We don't assume we understand everything the first time someone tells us, and we want to ask questions. We know that there are more than one way to do things. We want to explore the different avenues, and different people have different approaches. And we sort of thought that might be a good thing for students to see, and it might encourage students perhaps to question what they were seeing, and again involve perhaps in the conversation. A couple of quotes from the teaching survey. The teaching surveys were a little bit difficult to interpret this term because the university changed the questions to ask what students liked about online learning and what they found the challenges were. So we didn't really get the same kind of feedback on the courses as we usually do. But I took these 2 quotes from my teaching evaluation in that term, and perhaps they typify the 2 different ways in which some students actually liked this and appreciated this, and other students didn't. And maybe I'll give the positive one first, although I'm not sure of the reason for which these 2 lecturers for the course, there were 2 lecturers for the course. I was nevertheless very happy with their teaching. Their dynamic made it much more engaging, and there were quite a few funny moments that kept things interesting. So that was actually, I was pretty pleased to read that. It was sort of what we wanted to achieve, or part of what we wanted to achieve. But there were also lots of other comments which were basically a bit negative or confused, and the one up the top perhaps illustrates that. Jonathan would contradict Laura a lot, and this confused me, and it seemed like he did it for a bit of a laugh. So they just didn't sort of realize that when one of us was asking a question of the other one in the lecture, we were actually perhaps modeling the way we thought we wanted the students to engage, to think about what was being said, or to perhaps consider different approaches. And there were other comments about, for instance, we have in the lecture notes, we even make a point of the fact that there's more than one way for notation for vectors. And they'll see this probably in the future, like an arrow over the top and a tilde underneath, things like that. And some of the students just thought we were arguing about, we just couldn't decide, and we hadn't prepared, and we just like at each other's throats. But so I guess we tried not to. We were conscious that this might be a problem, and we didn't sort of try to, well, we thought we were making it into a conversation that the students would see that they should question and think about the maths they were learning. But some of them, that was probably a bit difficult for them to understand. So that was an interesting lesson. And then this sort of trial was completely ruined because in week 5, suddenly, suddenly COVID became much more important in everyone's life, and we had been sort of thinking about how we might move stuff online because it seemed like it might be coming, but then suddenly it just happened much more quickly than we thought. And on Monday of week 5, we realized that we had to move online, and we just told the students that classes were cancelled on Tuesday and see you on Wednesday in the other universe. And so how did we cope with this? Well, there was a lot of people involved, and there was a team of people, particularly people who had been involved in these virtual tutorials in 2019, played a big role because they had a lot of experience already with teaching. And the other tutors, well, their experience varied a lot. Some had been making videos, some, were quite used to social media, interactions, and everyone had a different experience, and everyone had different equipment too. Some people had almost nothing that they could use to teach online, and some had were quite well set up already. And between Monday and Wednesday, we didn't really manage to resupply everybody with fancy new equipment. Although there was a big rush to sort of get document cameras to people and things like that. And most people had something to work with. But the way we overcame people's sort of the varying experiences and lack of equipment and anxiety about how it might work, and just the new environment being really hard to work with, but if you're not used to it, was we combined tutorials. So we took essentially tutorials in pairs. Sometimes there was 3, but mostly pairs, and just said, okay, now you're together and in this online space, and you'll present together. And we gave a little bit of, very short bit of training on how to use the Blackboard Collaborate, and then sort of left it to the pairs of tutors to figure something out between them. We did try to, we did have some data on who had equipment and who didn't, and we did try to perhaps match up someone who had no equipment with someone, who had reasonably good equipment, so that one could, be showing something, the other one could be talking over it or something like that. But these problems were sort of alleviated a bit as time went on, when we managed to get more equipment to the tutors. The tutors, as I said, who had been part of the trial the year before, were really instrumental in making it work smoothly. We had essentially like a flying squad of these people who would drop into every tutorial and check that things were going okay, and sometimes take over. And but the main sort of thing that stabilized this so quickly was that we had everyone paired up. So this was sort of an emergency sort of solution. And during the trial the year before, we had carefully selected the tutors who would be involved, and made sure they had the right equipment. And also the students had to apply, and were carefully selected. They really that's what they wanted to do. They had a good reason for it, for doing it. And but when COVID hit, of course, it was just everyone. So not, obviously not everyone was on board or happy or interested to do it this way, but that's just what had to happen. So we combined the tutorials with 2 tutors in the class, so that equipment failures perhaps didn't, cause so much disruption, and the sort of cognitive overload, which I'm experiencing here a bit at the moment, and anxiety about presenting online was, alleviated to some extent. I think there were quite a lot of people who were very pleased to see that they weren't going to just be thrown into this environment alone. Okay, so that was the first term. We were sort of halfway through the term when this happened, but then of course COVID has continued, and we continued to run tutorials with a pair of tutors, even in later terms. We mixed around the sorts of styles that were on offer, but mostly we were. What I'm going to be talking about is tutors who were sort of in a tutorial style where they were leading the discussion. There were other styles, particularly in the life sciences courses that Laura and Joshua will talk about tomorrow with shared documents and such like. And we had some workshop style tutorials where the tutors would just turn up and the students would just turn up and work on things that the tutors would help them with in breakout rooms. And there was also a style of tutorial that pioneered by Kress, which was, we called it Choose Your Own Adventure. Tutorials where the idea was that students would choose more the direction the tutorial would take and what would be covered. But mostly it was sort of tutors leading the tutorials. So when we continued into term 2, where it wasn't sort of an emergency anymore, some tutors were very much in favour of continuing with co-tutoring, and others were very much against it. I definitely had a number of emails from both sides saying, please keep this going, and others saying, I really don't want to have a co-tutor this term. But we continued with it, mostly co-tutoring in terms 2 and 3. But we were sort of perhaps a bit careful to choose how the tutors were paired up. One thing we had in mind, and Laura and Joshua who are talking tomorrow, also the timetabling people in the school. So they were choosing who would be paired up. And we definitely made an effort to place new tutors with experienced tutors, and also to make sure that, that certainly that happened. If a tutor was doing more than one tutor in a week, that their first tutor would be with somebody who was more experienced if they had less experience. And also Chris's tutorial style, the Choose Your Own Adventure style, we made sure that some people who were experienced in that, the way the pairings worked, that someone who wasn't experienced with it would be part of a pair with someone who was before they went on. And so it was a sort of a tutor training exercise to some extent. We also wanted, we also sort of hoped that tutors would learn from each other. So we did make an effort to perhaps, if we felt somebody was in need of a bit of extra help, we would put them with someone who was good at this sort of online tutorial format. So we wanted to model good practice. I decided I was going to, talk about this at this meeting, and then I just didn't have anything to talk about other than what I've just said. So earlier in the week, if you're at UNSW, you would have got a survey, and I guess some of the people here filled out this survey. Maybe you'll see your comments in the next few slides. So I sent out a survey, and there were 34 responses by this morning. There's now 36. Those last 2 are not included in this talk. There were a variety of views, but there were more positive than negative. Okay. So maybe I'll just present essentially the some results from that survey. This is a staff survey of staff. We didn't. I haven't surveyed students about this, although there are comments in the student course evaluations and that kind of thing. So and there were some quite positive. I've seen positive ones, but I haven't really analysed them. Anyway, this was just a staff survey. So in that the top half of the screen there, this is overall. I'm just giving away the punchline here, but then we'll go into the detail. Overall, how do you feel about co-teaching versus teaching alone? And actually, I was quite surprised that more than half preferred or strongly preferred co-teaching. This survey includes both full-time academic staff and casuals who have been involved in the co-teaching. So more than half preferred or strongly or mildly preferred the co-teaching. There was a small group who have no preference, and then about a third in total either mildly preferred to tutor alone or strongly preferred to tutor alone. Now, there were various reasons for preferring or not preferring this. Just as a sort of indication of the people who were surveyed, about half, exactly half when it was I think it's still exactly half now. It's 36 respondents. But when it was 34, it was exactly half had more than 10 years experience. And the next biggest group was less than 5 years experience. And I guess that's because a lot of our tutorials are taken by PhD students, and they typically sort of don't hang around for more than 5 years. So that's, probably this blue group is not just PhD students, but mostly PhD students. Okay, so there is, I'm sitting outside, by the way, on the balcony, and so it's probably, I was going to ask if you could hear the street noise and the wildlife. Yeah, so right, okay, so that's the general thing. More of the tutors preferred co-teaching than not, and so how did that break down according to? Oh, I got that later. Sorry, no, I'll just have to look at each slide as it comes with. So what were your feelings before your first online tutorial lecture, co-teaching online? So this was a question in the survey this week, but it was asking about how they felt before starting the co-teaching online. So probably on Monday or Tuesday when we said on Wednesday you're teaching online, you're teaching with someone else. So the biggest response bar here was, it was a relief to know I wouldn't be alone in this new environment. So that's probably not surprising, and essentially perhaps the main reason we did it like this. A very small number said they didn't believe it was necessary. I think they're probably saying it wasn't necessary for them. And that's to be expected. I mean, there were certainly people who were already quite experienced in the online space. It wouldn't be necessary for them. And the next smallest group was, they were worried about it would make the tutorial incoherent or less coherent. And that comes out in some comments, more specific comments, mostly to do with the fact that it's harder to plan a tutorial when it's not just you. And it being, teaching alone is the way most people are used to. So it's not surprising that when suddenly you're thrown in with someone else, having to coordinate was more difficult. It seemed like there were people who were open to the idea. It seemed like an interesting idea. It seemed like a reasonable response in the emergency, and there were also a good number of people who were happy to help tutors who weren't so confident in the online space, get used to it. So after experiencing co-teaching online, how do you feel about it? Very small number said they prefer not to co-teach in the future. And the majority who answered this question, the numbers don't quite add up because not everyone, when you survey people, they skip questions, and I didn't make it compulsory. The majority said they would be happy to co-teach in the future, but probably a significant number of those, it was qualified by, it worked well in some cases, but not others, and some of them sort of gave particular reasons about that. So it worked well in this situation and not in another. So that's going to be interesting to sort of dig deeper into that data. So there was a significant number saying it worked well in some cases, but not in others. So most people who did this had multiple tutorial classes and different tutors, and the dynamic was quite different with different people, I imagine. Certainly it was when I was involved in anything I was involved in. It really depends a lot on who I was in the class with. Then there would, each of these questions allowed a sort of other box. You could put in just some extra comment. And these were the ones that came with this question. It was a great way to help bring a new tutor up to speed. And this was looking at the responses, the other responses to other questions from this particular person. They were a new tutor who was being sped up. Okay, so it depends entirely on who I'm paired with and what is the course. So this is just a sort of elaboration on that last idea there. Both of those were less than 5 year experienced tutors. And some tutors would want to talk in turns with no real interaction between the tutors. And I think some tutors, it was clear that certainly some tutors did not interact much with the other tutor. They just saw it as a your turn, my turn sort of thing. And we did at the beginning of each term send out in sort of advice to the tutors saying that we, that they should work, they should, get in touch with the person they were tutoring with and figure out how it was going to work. And that if they, it would be good if there was interaction so the students, could see the two tutors talking to each other and that kind of thing. But of course, we recognised that some tutors were still struggling with the equipment and such like. Okay, so this is, I thought this slide was coming earlier, but here it is now. They're broken down by years of experience. The preference for co-teaching or not. Well, I guess it's shown here. The top line here is tutors with less than 5 years of experience, and there was a clear preference for co-teaching, and that's sort of understandable. But there were some who didn't like that, and there were some comments that were along the lines of, I was worried that the more experienced tutor would see how would see how bad my tutorial was, and it would be embarrassing. There wasn't quite that, but that was the gist of their comment. But because it was an emergency, I think everybody just was put aside their concerns and just jumped in and were able to sort of experience this with, put that anxiety aside and just go with it. The other two groups were evenly split between preferring co-teaching and teaching alone, which I thought was quite interesting. In some cases, the more experienced staff, the things they didn't like was that they felt that their tutorial would be compromised by another tutor who didn't do as good a job, and other ones felt like they wanted to help the other tutor, mentor them. I suppose is. So just sort of mechanically, how did you and your co-tutor manage the tutorial? Alternating presenting solutions was the main mode, and that's fine. I think I think many of the comments suggested that it really helped to just in this environment. I think there was another comment in a previous talk about how exhausting it was to be teaching online. Partly because it's unfamiliar, I think, but partly just there's more sort of information coming in. And having the alternating, you could sort of just take it a little bit easier every second sort of problem that was being discussed. Some were sort of just monitoring the chat while the other one was presenting, and others were looking at commenting and interjecting with questions and things like that, making it a bit more of a conversation. And there were some who said things like, I could prepare the next problem. There were comments that said it was easier there was less preparation, only half as much preparation. And one even said they only presented every second week. They just took it in turns, week by week, which was not actually what we had in mind. But anyway, it was, as long as things were working, we weren't going to intervene. And there were a few people who said that we tried to make it more like a conversation than just taking turns. What were the main advantages? The biggest one was that, just the redundancy in technology, and if the equipment fails, the tutorial carried on. And there were quite a lot of equipment fails. I mean, it was all sorts of people. People have dodgy internet, not just students, academics as well. And that was a benefit. It makes presenting and answering questions in the chat more manageable. They could share that. This sort of thing has been tried. I've seen it in lectures where there is actually a live chat being monitored by a tutor, and that's something which is not new. Students get to see different approaches to the same problem. There were 17 people who thought that was an advantage. Seeing tutors in conversation breaks the ice and helps to invite students to contribute. 12 thought that was true. I don't have any hard evidence that I guess the tutors felt that was helping, it was working. It provides a more interesting and lively experience for students. This was the sort of original motivation for the co-lecturing that Thor and I did, and this was I guess the least chosen option here. It gives students a different perspective if two tutors discuss a problem. This sort of idea has been touched on in some other talks, that it's good not to just go down one rabbit hole. So and maths is sort of, you need to explore the maths. Some more advantages. These are all to do with sort of tutor training. It's a good way to train new tutors. And 18 the respondents said they saw new ways of presenting a problem or interacting with students that will improve their future teaching. And 9 said they were able to model good teaching that will help one of their co-tutors. This is not an advantage, actually. I must have copied and pasted that heading without changing it. These are disadvantages. What are the main disadvantages of co-teaching online? It's a waste of resources for that. It makes the tutorial more confusing for students. Only 2. I was surprised about that. I thought that would be. I think the students felt that was a bigger problem than the staff. It makes it harder to get through all the material. This is a bit of a bugbear of mine. I don't like the idea that we have to rush through everything to cover everything. I think it's better to slow down and do some things well than and the students can read up on other things in the notes and watch the lectures again later. The other tutors did not always do a good job. It was easier to run the tutorial on my own. These are sort of obvious things that you might expect. Some one-off comments that these were added in the other box. The tutorials were larger. It might intimidate some students. I think that effect really did happen. There were students it was a bigger group, so the students didn't. Some students didn't feel like they could contribute. Sometimes the tutors disagree. This could certainly happen. I guess there's all of these last ones here are really about the fact that you actually need to plan in advance with the co-tutor what you're going to do and make sure you're on the same page. And if you're going to discuss different approaches, that you are going to do it respectfully, shall we say. So all of those ones there are to do with whether you should, the fact that you need to plan these tutorials. And I think some tutors didn't really realize that or didn't do enough of that. So what would I say were the takeaways of all of this, just reading over those surveys? It's good for training new tutors, and it's good for training old tutors. Perhaps I should say retraining. I think there were plenty of people who felt that they'd been teaching for a long time and they actually saw some new things. It's one thing to say go and visit your colleagues and sit in on their classes, but it sort of doesn't happen unless it's this really forced it to happen. I think some students clearly hadn't really considered the value of dialogue in maths. It's disgusting. They really just want what's the right way. Tell me the right way, and they didn't. They weren't perhaps ready to accept this sort of conversation between 2 tutors. Planning is essential between the tutors, and I think we need perhaps we need to train people in co-teaching, or at least give them some resources and encouragement, ideas about how you might plan the tutorial and what could go wrong if you don't. So that would be, anyway, that's all I have to say.